what we're going to do in these last few minutes, I can start and I'll go up to the whiteboard there. I've got some sticky notes and just let everyone know what our group has been talking about. We talked about dust control quite a bit, so like the City of Camrose just doesn't do it, and in other jurisdictions there's options for limiting the amount of it where it's appropriate. We also talked about some other options for dust control. I think Kyle with Leduc talked about using DL5 or DL20. It's an oil that you can put on the gravel roads instead of calcium chloride. And another option is putting reclaimed asphalt on gravel roads, and that'll help keep the dust down as well. We talked a bit about how all the road salt policy is going to be contrasted with road safety, and there's always going to be trade-offs with that. So, better understanding why and where accidents happen can help you figure out what needs to happen, and also what the public perception of a certain policy is going to be. So we need to keep people safe, and also don't want that people to be upset as well. And then one other option for reducing the amount of sanding needed was just not clearing snow as often. If it just gets, in certain conditions, if you just leave it, it can be packed down and be a perfectly drivable and safe surface. Sometimes freezing rain or freeze thaw, or in the spring, that can then cause problems. So it's not a perfect solution, but it can help, especially in some places in the city where they can't get around to clearing all the residential areas. It just doesn't need to be salted. Would someone else like to come up?
So, need to adjust policies and practices to the climate. I think they kind of touched on that. Education of the public, and maybe don't require bare pavement on roads. So plowing them, but not straight to bare pavement. Consider banning de-icers similar to cosmetic fertilizer, while at the same time providing sand to residents so that they're able to use something. In parking lots, use chips versus salted sand so it doesn't track into buildings and damage indoor floors, and especially something to promote with some of the retail businesses like Costco and stuff like that, which tend to create a lot because they're worried about getting sued on the ice. Most municipalities already have a sewer bylaw, so enforcement of contaminants into the storm and sanitary sewer system. So we probably already have those policies in place. Policy changing, Carson talked about that. Service levels, so 24 hours versus 72 hours. Don't subsidize dust control. Change the mandatory winter tires, so you don't need to do as much. There was some discussion around recycled sands and the pros and cons. Discussion that Alberta Transportation might need to consider their guidelines. Apparently, if they don't have clear pavement within 2 hours, the contractors get a fine. So that's part of the reason they're using so much material on their highways. Again, I think that just talks about recycled sand, de-icing versus anti-icing, areas that aren't regulated, sidewalks and parking lots, and again, education around dealing with that, and trying to change the expectations of road conditions.
The real answer to this problem is fire the lawyers, because everybody does this because they're worried about being sued. Summer villages don't use salt. We just leave the roads natural. And if they get a little shiny, we put grit on them. And then it snows a couple of days later and we start over again. So and the only icy spots are generally where the county roads are tracked, where the salt is tracked in for half a kilometer, and that's icy. But once you get to the non-salted portion, it's good. So we don't use salt. And we also talked about what salt does to roads. Like it melts the snow, the water freezes, forms black ice, and that's why they have to get in this vicious circle to keep salting. So, and we talked about talking to the county and regulating what they do to kind of keep the salt off the roads.
Tom, what's in the grit? What is it?
It's just a chip.
And is there
potato chip or what kind of chip?
Rock chip.
Rocks chip.
Rock chips. It's like a five-sided.
Not a potato chip.
They don't freeze to each other.
And are you sure there's no salt added so it doesn't freeze? And where do they store it?
Well, you see, the reason it doesn't freeze, the porosity is less than sand. So you got to just think of a boulder, and so it can roll around free. Well, it's not a boulder, obviously, but it doesn't freeze like sand does because the water sticks to the sand grains and stays wet.
The smaller the particle, the more moisture it retains. Chip material, like we use that in parking lots in our municipality. We don't. It's covered, but we don't add salt to it. It's 2 to 5 millimeters in size typically, or maybe it's 5 to 7. So a limestone chip tends to work nicer. There's quite a bit of that in the area. Rocky Mountain also has a pretty good supply of the limestone chip. The sand that we're getting is, depending on when and where it's harvested, it can be quite wet. And if you're putting that outside, you do need to add a certain amount of salt to the material to prevent it from freezing. I like your ideas about using the grit. One of the things that we found successful too in St. Albert is we keep our residential roads in snowpack condition until we achieve a certain limit of snowfall. We use ice blades on our underbody trucks to groom up the roads like you would see on a ski hill. That provides some traction, putting some air back into that. So you talk about when the sheen forms on top. When it's cold, that definitely happens quite often. Moving in with ice blades kind of grooms up the road and provides traction for a short time. If you add salt to that material, you add chip to that material, it embeds in the snowpack and it just it doesn't last, right? It's good for about half an hour and then the traffic gets it in below that surface. So we found using ice blades has been quite beneficial for us.
So just one last comment on the chips, adding chips to the roads. There's a comment made about, or a worry made about chipping your windshields because it bounces up, and you can only get a chipped windshield when you're going fast because you're running into the rock that's in the air, not the rock flying at you.
So the Summer Village is a good spot for that.
But the balance is a broken windshield, rarely, or black ice and a total wreck and a fatality. So that from a safety issue or a cost issue, we will talk cost, not safety. We don't want to talk about safety. The cost of a broken windshield is nothing compared to a car that's totally demolished, rolled over, or whatever. So you don't get the black ice with the chips, but you do with the salt.
We get tons of complaints from the citizens.
Yeah. So it's one of the things that the town of Mornville did was we entered into a purchasing agreement with ENCON, and they do the highway. So we have access to their building, and the same type of building as you've seen on the slides there with the County of Leduc. And keeping that material covered is critical because it does get wet and then it cakes, and then you have problems. You got to start breaking it up, and then you're getting higher concentrations of whatever that, it doesn't mix well, it doesn't spread well. So we've done that, and that's given us the access to that building, which we wouldn't have had had we not entered the purchasing agreement. So I guess that's some collaboration. Yeah.
What other best management practices do you think, from all the ideas that we've discussed today, what could be implemented in your jurisdiction? So you can split it up in the short, medium, or long term. It doesn't have to be an easy solution. You can think of the low-hanging fruit to do in the short term, but also the longer-term goals to work towards. And then as a final point there, especially if there's some more difficult things to do, what sort of supports or partnerships would be helpful?
What additional best management practices could be implemented in your jurisdiction short term? I think it was kind of knowledge and opportunities of lack of sustainable funding. So kind of what, funding could be needed, or, is it 1 year? Could it be ongoing? Looking at that. Short-term, reevaluating penalties, especially in different areas where there's liability, what expectations. I think it was an issue looking at drainage. It's like, well, if there's a foot of ice, how am I supposed to get rid of that foot of ice? And another short-term, I think, it was on the Morinville side, charging the contractor and the public for dumping and actually monitoring how much is getting dumped there. I thought that was interesting. Education, obviously. Short-term, continuous, ongoing. Short-term, learning from other jurisdictions. That is kind of an example of what we're doing right now. Medium-term, we're looking at vegetation, even aquatic vegetation. Would be interesting to see what plants are tolerant. I think there is a good discussion on a lot of weeds grow in a lot of the areas. So how can we kind of better optimize a lot of vegetation that's dealing with the impacts of salt? Medium term, having tools for public works that are multi-seasonable and applicable during obviously the different seasons that Alberta has to deal with. Not past one. Looking at kind of the slopes and hydrology, so where the snow is concentrating and where it's going to eventually be melting. Kind of tying into that, just the hydrology, where is the water moving within different jurisdictions, municipalities. Long-term, stormwater management. So looking at outfalls, catch basins, and stuff like that. I'm just taking up a whole spot here. Long-term, looking at building up kind of information around groundwater and soil, because a lot of those kind of natural areas will, it'll infiltrate and kind of build up. So how can we better look at monitoring that and looking at kind of the effects as well. Equipment upgrades, long-term, again, expensive, how can we spread more effectively, going from analog to digital in a lot of sense. Long-term as well, planning and policy alignment. I think, we always kind of draw the border, but the intermunicipal collaborations and communication is very effective. And I think, what support and partners are needed to make this happen? Kind of, someone bringing everyone to the table, because how we can better partner on efforts, intermunicipal efforts, and once again, what grants are out there, kind of funding, because a lot of provincial and federal stuff is like, how can we be more, environmentally friendly, but a lot of it's electric kind of focus. So, what is out there for support financially?
I think this is a shorter term one, but the training for operators that the Leduc is doing and that St. Albert's also doing, I think is really important. Also extending that to the contractors that are doing provincial highways and everyone else, to get everyone on the same page with that. In a more medium-term one, or maybe even long-term, but the different guidelines for rural and urban highways, assessed how in some places it may be possible to not have salt at all on highways, but still necessary in urban areas. So figuring out where to put things might be different for different areas. So that medium. Research for the local climate. We talked about how lots of research and practices are based on the East Coast or further south, and we are very, very cold region compared to everywhere else on Earth, so we need research for our own place, probably longer term. Working with residents and businesses, they're putting salt on the road as well, and are also the ones who are reacting to what municipal policies are like. So working and educating with them, ongoing again, short-term, ongoing. The guidelines and contracts for the contractors for clearing the roads in a certain amount of hours, and how being more specific about how that happens and what they're expected to do. Thought that could be hopefully updated. I don't know how long ago those were all made, but those need to be updated. Maybe a medium term. We suggested a 5th R, record. So it goes along with the research that, for example, along the Anthony Henday or along other local places, there's different contractors doing different things. So you can actually see what's working or not. But if no one's recording that, then we're not learning. So that's something we can do. And then some partnerships The city-county partnerships are very helpful. There was some kudos to cameras. Well done. More discussions like this. So I'm glad people are enjoying these. And other associations like the RMA, that's Rural Municipalities of Alberta, and other groups of municipalities.
I'm not gonna fill out the rest of the board. Most of these were already talked about, so monitoring, partnerships, all of that stuff, we covered the same ground. But we did talk a little bit about economies of scale, so we talked about the Beat 55 being so expensive, but if maybe all of us are buying it, that we'll start maybe reducing those costs. I don't know if that's possible or not. And then lots of discussion around low salt road design. So before you even build the road, designing it so that it's using different materials or a different layout, or instead of sloping it to the bridge, it's sloped away from the bridge so the water's not pooling on the bridge. Tree setbacks, which most rural municipalities are already using to prevent icing on the roads, is you're not allowed a tree within 40 meters of the road so that this doesn't shade the road and create icing. So lots of great ideas around just designing our roads better to begin with.
Now we're asking you for help. We've got all these good ideas, and now we want to talk about what are the practical recommendations. What can we do? What can we start to look at for Pigeon Lake, or for anywhere else, for Sturgeon River, or for your own municipality or county? Where can you start? What are the pathways to making progress on this?
Reconsider road design, which we talked about before. We added another R, just because we like the R's. So we you had recording, we added reporting. Monitoring of lakes and creeks should be marked in our water management plans as a requirement. We should be reaching out to RMA or Public Works managers or wherever they get together about looking at buying in bulk to see if we can save some money on some of these things. Ask stores not to showcase salt for personal use. Because, you know, as you walk into Canadian Tire, there's stacks of it. So, or a sign saying, don't do it. Reach out to Public Works personnel at their conference and talk about awareness of the issues, let them share their best management practices, training and good ideas from each other on how we can enhance our road maintenance. Ban personal de-icers and provide sand to the public. Talked again about how we just keep salt off the road to begin with. Literacy and education. If people don't know it's an issue, it's hard to get them to do anything. And probably most importantly, yell at your MLA and MP so that they know it's an issue.
So we had a discussion around that there's some provincially mandated reporting to Alberta and Canada. Apparently, the salt use is reported to Alberta Environment. And Alberta Environment consolidates all of that and may submit something to Environment Canada or whoever puts the salt together. There's maybe some opportunities to deal with industry groups, truckers and so forth that interact with Alberta transportation. And part of that too is that Northern Alberta has freshwater lakes that are a bit more vulnerable, and somehow those conversations need to be folded together. I have a note here, Main Roads, ENCON, and Alberta Transportation. I guess it was, anybody want to elaborate? So a lot of our concern was sort of dealing with those rural highways and some of the guidance around the operators of those highways. We had a really good conversation at our table about sharing salt management plans between municipalities. And there was a little, here's my email kind of thing going on, so that was really good. And a comment generally that it seems that liability, legal liability and so on is really driving the increase in use societally, and maybe needs to be examined some of the downsides of the salt use in certain conditions.
So education, obviously, again, on to the community members on runoff and the effects of salt. Good one is how do you get that information out? Sometimes you can hand it, yeah, we're joking, you can hand it to someone, but they'll still be like, I never got it. So different ways, so social media, website, mail out, just different kind of, I guess, opportunities to communicate. Yeah, and as I say, Pigeon Lake has a great kind of communication between the summer villages, so just maintaining that and then kind of elevating it if needed. Improved land management practices. Breaking down the data, because I once again say salinity isn't just from road applications, so a lot of different kind of land uses again, so producers to kind of private landowners, kind of what does the data say? Making salt management plans required, required just elevates the knowledge and ownership. And I'll shout this one out to Rosie. So kind of the lake community of practice. So I think sharing that knowledge, kind of what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, is there any research opportunities, kind of that funding, sharing, kind of, yeah. So how can we elevate a community of practice? Not necessarily maybe around salt, but kind of on lake stewardship. And everyone plays a part. So I'll tie that in with community of practice.
It's looking to me like there's more data collection for the effects on our environment and where this is happening, where it's actually coming from. There needs to be data collection about what's going on the roads. Seems like there is an opportunity to see what the different practices are doing, since there's a great variety of road salt management going on, that if we took the time and resources to look at it, maybe there's some good solutions here. Educating everybody, seems like that's what we always do with all our watershed activities, so that's a good thing to continue doing. And talking to the provincial government and their contractors is maybe a loftier goal, but something we should figure out how to do. And that maybe will come from the municipalities as well, since we're talking about all of them getting their salt management plans, adopting best management practices, reporting to the provincial government, and maybe that we can put some pressure to change the guidelines for clearing highways, for liability, and for monitoring as well. So, does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to add? Because those are mine. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. I'm glad we had such a great group coming out here. Our board is full, and we have lots of good ideas to go forward.